Jaunty music, mischief in the air, and a warning from the Conservatives in this campaign video tweeted yesterday. If you bet on Labour, you can never win. Only, it's the Tories betting that's now the problem, and this post has since been deleted.
Hi, my name's Laura Saunders and I'm the Conservative Party candidate for Bristol North West.
She's also being investigated by the Gambling Commission for allegedly betting on the timing of the election. Her husband is now also being investigated because until yesterday, when he took a leave of absence, Tony Lee was the Conservative Director of Campaigning.
On the 4th of July, vote Laura Saunders, Conservative Party candidate for Bristol North West.
But when did she know the election was going to be in July? The Gambling Commission and Conservative Party said they would not comment on ongoing investigations. But in a statement today, Ms Saunders said she, quote, will be cooperating with the Gambling Commission. Laura Saunders is now the third person to be investigated over alleged bets on the timing of the election, and the third with a link to the Prime Minister, who himself is not implicated in any wrongdoing. Laura's husband, Tony Lee, was, until yesterday, the Conservative Party's Director of Campaigning. The first was Craig Williams, Rishi Sunak's parliamentary private secretary, who placed a bet on a July election 3 days before it was announced, something he since called a huge error of judgment. And yesterday, one of Rishi Sunak's close protection officers was arrested and suspended over alleged bets.
Did you know that an election was going to be called for July?
Only when the Prime Minister told me himself.
A second Conservative is being investigated for placing a bet on when the election would be. It's not a great look, is it?
No, it's not a good thing for anyone. If they knew, and they're being investigated, we don't know the conclusions yet, but if someone had inside information and they used that to place a bet, that's bad.
Should they be suspended while they're being investigated?
I think, again, we should allow the investigation to, pursue its own course, and I hope that it concludes quickly.
That's a line that simply doesn't cut it for the former Director of Public Prosecutions and current Labour leader.
This candidate should be suspended, and it's very telling that Rishi Sunak has not already done that. If it was one of my candidates, they'd be gone and their feet would not have touched the floor.
Housing, not safe as houses bets, was meant to be the focus of today for both parties. Labour saying they would force landlords to improve the energy efficiency of rental homes and reform planning rules to speed up house building. While there was no help for those with mortgages today from the Bank of England, they chose to keep interest rates at 5.25%. The Conservatives said they would help first-time buyers by permanently scrapping stamp duty on properties up to £425,000.
How much of the time are you here on site?
But this is a campaign where announcements are often finding themselves secondary to events. Events like a record number of MPs announcing they would not be seeking re-election.
Is this the worst campaign that you've seen in your time as an MP?
No.
Which was worse then?
My leadership campaign in 2016.
What about general election campaigns?
Again, I'm not equipped to judge because...
Yes, you are perfectly equipped.
We haven't come to the end of it.
OK, well, is this the worst first month of a general election campaign since you've been an MP?
Well, I'm a participant and not a commentator. Once the election campaign has concluded, all of us can form a judgment. But, let's wait until the final moment. Let's wait until the whistle blows.
Some people might look at this and say, you didn't just say no.
Again, that's because I'm a participant in this election.
Lastly then, what's next for Michael Gove? The jungle? MasterChef? What about the dance floor? Either Strictly or an Aberdeenshire nightclub?
I think it's probably better that not only do I dance like nobody's watching, but I dance in places where no one actually is watching.
When Michael Gove announced he was standing down after nearly 20 years, he said it was time to let a new generation lead. The fear among Conservatives, the party left to lead after this election, may be far, far smaller. Look, despite the walls crumbling on the Conservative campaign at the moment, there was a joviality to Michael Gove's responses there, bordering on a demob happy mood. And you get this almost a resignation among Tory MPs that you speak to, that this is all going very, very badly. Another concern among them at the moment, there have been varying reports today of a spike in bets on a July election on May 20 to the 21st. I put that to the Gambling Commission today. They said to me, quote, to protect our investigation, we will not be answering any further questions which may relate to the allegations. So it's not a no there, that there's nothing else that they're looking at. There is a feeling among Conservative MPs that the election now is almost a foregone conclusion, and they just cannot catch a break. From announcing the election in the pouring rain, to leaving D-Day early, to what's unfolded today, culminating in the Director of Campaigning to take a leave of absence. Tory WhatsApp groups are livid. I can't read out on air before the watershed what is going on in most of them. To give you a sense though, one of them described Tony Lee as, quote, a complete pudding. And of course, while we're talking about this, what we're not talking about is policy like housing today.
Paul, thanks very much. Keeping it clean, thank you. Well, as we've just heard in Paul's report, housing policy, including help for renters and first-time buyers, has become a key election battleground. This morning I went to find out what Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner has to say, including on Awab's Law, named after the 2-year-old boy who died as a result of prolonged exposure to mould in a social housing flat.
Hello, hiya, hi everyone.
Renters in West London are sharing their problems with Angela Rayner, in the hopes that in just a fortnight's time, she may be in a position to solve them with a seat in the Cabinet as Housing Secretary. She announced a series of pledges to address the rental crisis.
We hope will mean that things will get a lot easier for people, especially in the rental sector.
And she told Channel 4 News exclusively this would include extending Awab's Law to the private sector too. It already requires social housing landlords to take swift action to remove hazards like damp and mould.
Well, we see over a quarter of the private rental sector where the decent home standards are not being met. So by extending Awab's Law to the private sector, it means that we will improve people's health, because we're seeing far too many health hazards in the private rental sector, which is not fair on people who are paying high rents and are not getting habitable homes which keeps them healthy and safe.
And would you do this in the first 100 days? Is this a top priority?
It's a top priority. I mean, there's a lot of work that we need to do, but we'll get motoring on it as quickly as we possibly can.
Well, let's talk about how you're going to build your way out of this problem in part. You want 1.5 million homes over 5 years, 300,000 a year. I mean, that has never been done, not even in the 1970s. How do you think you'll succeed where previous governments haven't?
Because we've recognised some of the challenges and the problems. First of all, we know that we need to deal with the planning restrictions that we face. The Tories ripped up local housing targets. We want to reintroduce those. We want to use our mayoral models to get our new towns up and running and to really drive that housing planning that we need for the future.
Just to stick on this target, 300,000 a year, the average over the last decade has been 178,000 a year. Neither the Blair government nor the Brown government managed anywhere near what you're looking for. Do you accept it's a very tough target? You might not meet it.
It is a very ambitious target, but I think with the planning reforms, with the support working with the developers, with helping housing associations and local authorities through the Affordable Homes Grant, I think by making those adjustments, we can make that target a reality. The Conservatives,
you think you'll hit that year in, year out?
I think, you know, in the first year, you may not meet it year in, year out, but within the 5 years of the next Parliament, we will meet that 1.5 million homes target.
Yeah, but if you don't meet it in the first year, you have to do even more than 300,000 in the second year and years after.
I mean, to be fair, some of the challenges we're going to face is around planning reform and, you know, the Affordable Homes Grant, adapting that to make sure we can get that money out of the door. That might not happen in the first month, but we're certainly going to make sure that that's quickly available so that we can get those housing targets and we can get those homes built.
You yourself benefited from Right to Buy, which is blamed for a lot of the problems of shortage of social housing. The Lib Dems and the Greens both say they'll scrap Right to Buy. Labour's Mayor, Andy Burnham, says that building new council housing while Right to Buy remains is like trying to fill a bath with the plug out. I wondered, given that you have benefited from that very policy, would you set him straight?
Well, first of all, I benefited from the previous policy in 2007. In 2012,
with smaller discounts?
Yeah, with smaller discounts. In 2012, the discounts were made much more reduced, and we haven't built the council houses because we can't build like for like on the flow of how many council houses have been sold. So we said we would review Right to Buy to look at the discount rates. But if
we're not reviewing the whole policy, you're in favour of Right to Buy,
We're
right?
in favour of Right to Buy, but we'll review the discounted rates so that the taxpayers are not losing out and we can build the social housing that we need. But it has to be reasonable and fair.
Well, let's talk about fairness, because that's at the heart of all this, isn't it? Keir Starmer has repeatedly refused to rule out a change in council tax banding. So what I wanted to ask you was whether you think it is fair that someone living in a house worth around £70,000 in Nottinghamshire pays more in council tax than a multi-millionaire in a mansion in Mayfair. Is that fair?
Well, look, we've set out that our tax proposals and reforming council tax is not one of our priorities. It's actually about how we build those homes for the future.
Yeah, but is it fair? That's what I'm asking you. Is that scenario that I set out fair?
That's the system that we've got at the moment, and that's the system that is going to continue, because I have no plans to change that.
It's not your top priority, clearly, but at some point in a first term, that is something that could happen. You're not ruling it out, rebanding council tax.
Well, look, there's a significant amount of work that we need to do. Unfortunately, the Tories promised renters reform. They didn't do that. They promised to end no-fault evictions. They haven't done that. We've got a renters programme that will make people better off with better protections.
And, I mean, you know, you have talked about your extraordinary journey from poverty, as you say, to potentially Deputy Prime Minister. I mean, I know you don't want to look like you're measuring up the curtains for Chequers or whatever, but do you pinch yourself and think, is this really going to happen to you?
The thing for me is about the prospect of being able to make the change. I've done 9 years in opposition since I was elected. I relish the opportunity to prove to people why they elected me, to say, I'm going to change this, I'm going to build those houses we need, I'm going to make those secure jobs that people can live and raise their families on. We've got to have that change in the UK, and I'm very proud and looking forward to an opportunity to really show what we can do and what we can deliver.
You speak of being proud there. Your mum, who you often looked after when you were a teenager, is she proud?
She is, and my whole community is. You know, it's lovely to see the people who I grew up with, many of which I'm still in touch with today, who are incredibly proud, because working class people, we just want to do a good job, you know, and we roll our sleeves up and we get on with it.
What's your mum say to you about the prospect of you being the most powerful woman in the country potentially in just a few weeks?
And whenever I speak to my mum, she said, I saw you on the telly, so I presume she's just going to turn around and say, I saw you on the telly.
She'll be seeing you a bit more on the telly in a few weeks' time. Angela Rayner, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now from York by the Business Minister, Kevin Holleray. Kevin Holleray, thanks very much for coming back on the programme. I want to start off by talking about bets, the scandal around bets. Now, you've lost your campaign manager for the last 2 crucial weeks of this campaign. Given the fact that the campaign's been so disastrous for you so far, is that a blessing in disguise?
Listen, I mean, what I've read and what I know about this sounds appalling. An investigation is going on into by the Gambling Commission. Quite rightly, we should wait for the outcome of that investigation. But of course, these allegations are serious, but must be properly investigated. Due process must be followed.
Should these people be suspended? Well,
it depends on the investigation, what happens and the outcome of that investigation. I think presumption of innocence is a very important principle. We should follow due process and then act accordingly.
But how embarrassing and how annoying, you know, there you are knocking on doors, trying to persuade people to still have trust in the Tory party and vote for your party in the coming elections, and the people at the very centre of the campaign, at the nerve centre of what's going on right now, are placing bets when there shouldn't be.
Well, it's a very unhelpful distraction. You're quite right. It's absolutely wrong. If the people have done what has been alleged, it's completely wrong, clearly. But you know, we are still getting a good feedback on the doorstep. We see strong support for ourselves, certainly in the doors I'm knocking on.
But I just wonder, it raises the spectre of a lack of designated adults around the Prime Minister, whether it's him leaving Normandy early or whether it's this thing, just a lack of discipline in what was once a kind of awesome, you know, machine of party political campaigning.
What you're talking about is isolated isolated incidents. What we are seeing on the ground is people are voting on the 4th of July for the next 5 years. That's what people should focus on. Who's best placed to run this country over the next 5 years? We've stabilised the economy. Inflation was at 11%. It's now at 2%. The economy is now growing after being predicted to go into recession. Things are much better in terms of our outlook. What the key thing is now, what we do over the next 5 years. In my view Rishi Sunak a far better person to look after our economy, look after our interests over the 5 years compared to Keir Starmer. And that's certainly what I'm hearing on the doorstep. People have no appetite for Keir Starmer, and people need to focus on what we've done over the last 14 years, how we've improved education, how young children are the best readers now in the Western world. Street crime is halved, 100,000 more doctors and nurses in the NHS. That's what that's what the record we're standing on, and we're going to see many more positive years ahead after some very difficult years behind us, and we've supported businesses and people's jobs through this difficult time, and now for some better years ahead. Stick with Rishi Sunak rather than Keir Starmer, which in my view is a massive risk.
It sounds like a party political broadcast, and I just wonder whether people are listening to that message, given all the other scandals of the campaign trail. But I want to ask you something else. You know, the Bank of England today did not lower interest rates, but they might do. They kind of some of the top dogs in the Bank of England hinted that they might do in the next month. If they lower those interest rates in the next month, and I know your inflation target's now down at 2%, do you then regret that you went early to this election? You should have waited a bit longer, shouldn't you?
Well, it's good news that you're even having this conversation. The Bank of England would not be thinking about reducing interest rates, and you wouldn't be talking about it if inflation wasn't at 2%, a target range, from 11.1%.
Right.
Very few people thought it would get to this point in time within 18 months. That's what we've delivered.
Okay.
Careful money management, careful management of the economy. So that's really good news that the Bank of England is thinking about that. So I think
right.
It's
one final brief on it, if I may.
Get more confidence in the future.
We had the largest number of small boats crossing the channel yesterday, partly because of the weather. You can't stop the bets, and you're still not stopping the boats. Well,
one good thing we've managed to do, despite very difficult circumstances in terms of Labour opposing what we want to do in terms of the Rwanda legislation. What that legislation already does, it means those people crossing the channel no longer go into hotels, they go into detention. That will be a significant deterrent. And if people choose anything other than Conservatives on the 4th of July, then they're more likely to get Keir Starmer, who will scrap that legislation on day one. All that hard work, getting that legislation through, which changes the whole dynamic.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Kevin Hollinrake, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.